These access logs confirm your unauthorized entry at 0300 hours.
What do you have to say for yourself, Clara?
The elevator doors opened at 6:47 in the morning, and Clara Holt already had three things wrong with her day. Her coffee had gone cold somewhere between the subway platform and the lobby. The left heel of her shoe had developed a hairline crack she could feel with every step, a faint structural failure promising to betray her at the worst possible moment. And the message waiting on her phone sent at 6:31 from an unsaved number she recognized anyway read simply, "Move the Hargrove meeting to 7. Do not be late." No greeting, no explanation, not even a period at the end as though the sentence itself was too tired to bother closing. Clara stood in the marble lobby of Voss Capitol Tower and read it twice. The floors stretched wide and pale around her, the kind of stone that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a week, and was selected precisely because it made everyone who crossed it feel slightly underdressed for the occasion. Curtis Blaine, the security guard at the front desk, a man who had worked the morning shift for 11 years and had therefore witnessed every version of what happened to people in this building, gave her the look he gave her every morning. It was a small, careful expression somewhere between sympathy and quiet relief that he was not her. She typed back, "Hargrove meeting rescheduled. At my desk in 4 minutes." She made it in 3. The 42nd floor of Voss Capitol Tower was not a place that rewarded slowness. It was all clean lines and controlled light, the kind of office designed by someone who understood that space itself could be a weapon. Strip a room of anything soft, make it quiet enough and cold enough, and the people inside it will either perform at their absolute peak or they will break. In Clara's 2 years on the 42nd floor, she had watched 3 executive assistants before her make their exit. One cried in the elevator. One simply did not show up the next morning, leaving her badge on the front desk like a small white flag. And one, a sharp-eyed woman named Renata, who had since moved to a firm in Midtown and apparently slept again, had submitted her resignation via email at 2 in the morning with a subject line that read, "I will not be managed this way." That had been the 3rd assistant. Clara was the 4th hire in 22 months. She was still here. She set her bag down, pulled up the calendar system, and began moving pieces. The Hargrove meeting had been set for 9. Moving it to 7 meant contacting Arthur Hargrove's assistant, who was notoriously difficult before 8 in the morning, restructuring the prep materials Clara had organized the night before, and alerting the 3 analysts who were supposed to brief Declan at 8:30 that their window had just collapsed entirely. She did all of it in 14 minutes. She sent the last confirmation at 7:01, leaned back in her chair for exactly 4 seconds, then pulled up the full day's schedule to look for whatever else was already going sideways. Declan Voss arrived at 7:09. She heard him before she saw him. His walk had a particular rhythm, unhurried but purposeful, the kind of stride that parted crowds without asking them to move. He came off the private elevator at the far end of the floor, already in his jacket, a charcoal suit that fit the way expensive things fit when they are built for one specific body and no other. His hair was dark cut close at the sides. His jaw was set in its usual arrangement, somewhere between controlled and ready. He was 38 years old, and he moved through rooms the way weather moved, filling every corner of the available space without appearing to try. He did not look at her when he passed her desk. He never did. Not first thing. It was part of a pattern she had mapped the way you map a weather system, not to understand it exactly, but to survive it. The Hargrove file, he said, already 3 steps past her, already heading toward his office. "On your desk?" Updated as of 6:55. He paused, not completely. It was barely half a step, but she caught it the way she caught everything, with the particular attention of someone who had learned that small things were where everything lived. "The revised presentation is in the 2nd tab," she said. "I flagged 2 numbers in the Hargrove Group quarterly report that do not reconcile with what their CFO told us in March." I left a note. He stopped fully this time. "What kind of discrepancy? 11 million, give or take. Could be a reclassification. Could be something else." I did not want to assume. A beat of silence. He did not turn around. "Pull their audited statements from the last 3 years and have a comparison ready before the meeting. Already requested. Should have them by 6:40. Another pause. Longer. Then he walked into his office and closed the door. Clara let out a breath that she had not decided to hold. She reached for her cold coffee, took a sip, and made a face that no one saw. This was the job. This was every morning of the job. She produced results before he asked for them, anticipated needs he had not spoken aloud, and absorbed the particular atmosphere of working for a man who communicated mostly in omissions. Things he did not say, reactions he did not give, acknowledgments that never quite arrived. In 2 years, Declan Voss had said good work to her exactly once. She remembered it because she had written it down afterward in the small notebook she kept in her desk drawer. She had started that notebook in her first month when she began to understand that documentation was its own form of self-preservation. One entry, good work, 2 words spoken on a Tuesday morning in November after she had spent the previous night rewriting a briefing document from scratch, when the data source she had been given turned out to be 18 months out of date. She had also documented the other things. The meeting where he told her the quarterly summary she had stayed until midnight to prepare was inadequate. The morning he sent back a full briefing document with a single-line response. This is not what I asked for. The lunch where he had taken a call in front of 3 senior partners covered the phone and said to her quietly, which was somehow worse than shouting, "Do you understand what it costs me when you are not prepared?" She had been prepared. The error that day had been a catering miscommunication that had nothing to do with her, and he had known it by the end of the hour and said nothing about it afterward. She had written that one down too. The Hargrove audited statements arrived at 6:38. She had the comparison ready at 6:52. She slid the folder under his door because his light was already on, and she could hear him on a call. Low voice clipped sentences, the register he used when speaking to someone who needed to be reminded of consequences without being told them directly. She went back to her desk and thought about Joel. Joel Mercer had texted her the night before at 10:30, which was when she had finally gotten home after rewriting the Hargrove presentation. He had written, "Did you eat actual food today? Or did you survive on that terrible desk granola again?" She had laughed out loud in her apartment, still in her work clothes, standing at the refrigerator with the door open. It was the kind of laugh that came from somewhere she did not usually let herself access during the week, something underneath the composure and the structure and the 14-minute calendar reconstructions. She had written back, "I had half a sandwich and 3 grievances." He had responded with a voice memo, 32 seconds of him laughing, and saying she needed to let him take her to dinner this week, real dinner, the kind with chairs and actual napkins and food that did not come in a wrapper. She had listened to it twice before she fell asleep. Joel had been in her life since they were 9 years old, growing up 4 houses apart, in a neighborhood in Queens that no longer looked the way either of them remembered it. They had lost touch during college, during the years when everyone scatters and convinces themselves that distance is temporary. A chance encounter at a mutual friend's birthday 6 months ago had pulled them back into each other's orbit. He was a landscape architect now, which suited him. He had always been the kind of person who noticed what things needed to grow, who paid attention to what needed shelter and what needed space. He was nothing like this office, nothing like any of this. She was still thinking about his voice message when Declan's door opened. He came to stand in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, the Hargrove comparison in his other hand. He was reading it with an expression she could not fully decode. Not displeasure. Something tighter than that. Focused in a way that was different from his usual controlled attention. "The 11 million, he said. It is a subsidiary transfer moved off the books in the 3rd quarter and brought back in the 4th under a different line item." He looked up. "How did you find this?" It was not quite a question. It never quite was. "I cross-referenced their public filing with the March transcript," Clara said. "Their CFO mentioned a subsidiary consolidation, but the language was vague. I looked for where the number went." He studied her for a moment. She kept her expression neutral, which she had become very good at. "This changes our negotiating position," he said. "I know. We go in knowing they have a leverage problem they have not disclosed. I flagged it for that reason." He looked at her for another second, that flat, unreadable look that always made her feel she was being measured against a standard she had not been given access to. Then he went back into his office without another word. Clara turned back to her screen. By noon, the Hargrove meeting had produced exactly what Declan wanted, which was a renegotiated contract structure that saved Voss Capital $14 million over 3 years and left Arthur Hargrove looking like a man who had brought a letter opener to something considerably more serious. The number Clara had flagged, the 11 million subsidiary transfer, moved quietly off the books. and back again had been the pivot point. Declan had laid it on the table like a card he had been holding all morning, his voice unhurried, his expression giving nothing away, and Arthur Hargrove's composure had cracked in the way of a man realizing the room he thought he was running had already been understood by someone else before he walked in. Clara sat in the corner of the conference room throughout with her laptop open, ready to pull any document Declan gestured toward. She watched him work, and that was the thing about Declan Voss that complicated everything. He was extraordinary at what he did, not in the way that wealth alone made people impressive, but in the earned way of someone who understood every room he walked into at a molecular level. He read people, he read numbers. He understood where pressure could be applied and where it would only produce resistance, and he calibrated everything in real time with a precision that was almost uncomfortable to witness. What she had not anticipated when she took this position was how much of the work she would do and how little of the credit would ever find its way back to her. After the meeting, she returned to her desk to find a revised presentation deck waiting with a sticky note on top. Errors on slides 7, 12, and 19. Fix before end of day. She pulled up the slides. There were no errors on slide 7. There was a formatting inconsistency on slide 12, a font size off by 2 points. Slide 19 had a data label that was technically accurate, but stylistically inconsistent with the rest of the deck. She fixed all 3. She also fixed 6 other things he had not mentioned because she had stopped waiting for instructions on things she could already see. She was finishing the 4th when her phone buzzed. Joel again. Thursday dinner. I found a place. It has actual tablecloths. You deserve tablecloths. She smiled before she could stop herself. It was a fast smile, the kind that disappeared quickly in offices like this one, but it happened. She was still holding the phone when she heard him. Something funny. She looked up. Declan was standing near the printer station, not looking at her, collecting something from the output tray. His voice had been flat, not accusatory, just the tone of a man who cataloged everything and filed it away. Personal message, Clara said. It will not happen again. I did not say it was a problem. I know, she set the phone face down. The revised deck will be ready by 3:15. He picked up his papers and walked away. She sat very still for a moment. Then she picked the phone back up and typed to Joel. Thursday, I will be there. Do not let me cancel, even if I say I have to work late. He responded in under a minute. I will show up at your building with the tablecloth myself if I have to. Thursday arrived the way good things did that week, smaller and quieter than the days around it. Clara changed in the office bathroom at 6:30, trading her structured blazer for something softer, and took the subway uptown to the restaurant Joel had chosen, which did in fact have tablecloths. White ones, slightly too formal for a Thursday, but genuinely lovely. Joel was already there when she arrived. He was 31, lean in the way of someone who worked with his hands, with an open face that gave away everything he was thinking. He stood up when he saw her, and there was nothing calculated about it, nothing performed. He just stood up the way people used to. You look exhausted, he said, which was something she noticed about him. He told her true things. Thank you, she said, sitting down. That is exactly what I needed to hear. I mean it in a good way. Heroically exhausted. That is barely better. It is much better. How was the week? She told him about it. Some of it. The Hargrove meeting, the revised deck, the small, accumulating humiliations she had gotten so practiced at absorbing that she sometimes forgot they were humiliations until she said them out loud to someone who reacted normally. Joel listened the way he always listened, without performing concern, just actually paying attention. Why do you stay? He asked at one point. Not unkindly, genuinely curious. She thought about it for a real moment before she answered. Because I am good at it, she said, and because leaving feels like letting something win, that something being him, or the version of myself that would walk away because it got hard. Joel looked at her across the table. There is a difference, he said carefully, between staying because you are strong and staying because you have convinced yourself that enduring mistreatment is the same as strength. It was a quiet thing to say, and it landed somewhere real. She did not answer it directly. She changed the subject, asked about his current project, a park redesign in Brooklyn, with native plantings and a water feature he had been sketching for weeks, and let the evening move into easier territory. But the question stayed with her, settled somewhere underneath everything else, patient and waiting. It was later outside the restaurant, standing on the sidewalk in the October cold, with the city making its usual indifferent noise around them, that Joel did something unexpected. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from her face. A small gesture, gentle, the kind that required nothing in response. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized but had not let herself name yet. She was still deciding what to do with it when she heard a car slow near the curb. She did not look immediately. There were always cars slowing on that block, a restaurant strip where vehicles idled while passengers climbed out or valet circled. She heard it the way you heard ambient city sound without registering it as relevant. She turned back to Joel. She did not see the black car across the street. She did not see the figure sitting in the back seat very still who had not moved in almost 30 seconds. She did not know, walking to the subway, that Declan Voss had no professional reason to be on that street that night. She did not know that he had rerouted his driver without explanation and had sat in that car and watched through the glass, and that what he had seen had done something to him he was not yet equipped to name. She went home. She fell asleep. She was wrong to think it did not mean anything. The following Monday began the way Mondays usually began. Clara arrived early. Declan arrived just after her. The machine of the day turned over. But something was different. She felt it the way you felt a change in air pressure before weather arrived, not visible, not certain, just a wrongness in the atmosphere that had no clear source. He was looking at her, not in any way she could have reported to anyone, not in any way that had a name in the usual professional sense. But throughout the morning she caught it, a glance that lasted half a second longer than it should have, a stillness in him when she entered a room that was not his usual containment. He had always been someone who did not waste attention on her beyond what the work required. Now there was something else in the economy of that attention, something she could not identify and could not ignore. In the afternoon briefing, he asked for her opinion. He had never done that before. They were reviewing a community development proposal that had been sitting on his desk for 3 weeks. A mixed-use project with a below-market housing component that one of his senior partners had been pushing. Declan had been unmoved by it. His model did not include what he called charity, meaning anything that did not produce a clear return line. He looked up from the document and said without preamble, "You have read this." Yes, she had read it in week 1 because she read everything that crossed his desk. What do you think? The room had 2 other people in it. Stellencraft, his head of acquisitions, a careful man with 6 years in this building who had survived by being reliably useful and reliably invisible. And Audrey Walsh, a junior analyst who had requested a transfer back to the 42nd floor 3 months ago, who went very still when Declan asked the question as though she was witnessing something unusual, which she was. Clara kept her voice even. "I think the return model is underselling the long-term value. Below-market housing in that corridor creates neighborhood stability, which historically increases surrounding property values within a 4-year window. If you run that projection out to year 7, it is not charity. It is a bet with a better margin than it looks." Silence. Declan looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the document. "Pull the comparable data," he said to Stellan. "The ones that match her corridor profile. I want to see the 4-year window." Stellan blinked. "Sure," he said. Clara looked down at her notebook. Nothing was said about it afterward. No explanation, no acknowledgement that this was different from every other interaction they had had in 2 years. Declan moved on to the next item as though nothing had shifted. But something had shifted, and she could feel it, the way a seam felt when it was coming loose. Not broken yet. Changed. It was Stellan who said something at the end of that week. He caught her in the copy room on Friday afternoon. Stellencraft, who had been with Declan for 6 years and had survived by learning precisely how much to see and how little to say, who had the careful manner of someone who had mapped every current in this building and knew exactly which ones would pull you under. "You doing all right?" he asked, in the way people asked when they were building towards something. "I am fine," Clara said, feeding pages into the scanner. While he leaned against the counter, "He asked for your opinion. He has asked my opinion before." "On logistical matters," Stellan said. "Not on a strategic position. Not in a room with 2 other people." He turned a pen over in his fingers. "I have been here 6 years. He has never done that." Clara said nothing. "I am not saying it to make you uncomfortable. I am saying it because things change in this building, And when they change around Declan Voss, it helps to know which way the wind is blowing. Which way do you think it is blowing? She asked. Stellan looked at her for a moment, something in his face that was somewhere between professional concern and genuine human warning. I think he sees you differently now, he said, and I think you should decide what you want to do with that before it decides for you. He set the pen down and left. Clara stood in the copy room alone, listening to the scanner hum through its pages and tried to identify the feeling that had settled in her chest. Something complicated and uneasy, and not entirely unwelcome, which was the part that worried her most. Her phone buzzed. Joel, a rough pencil sketch of the Brooklyn Park redesign. Open and unhurried lines, the kind of drawing that looked like someone thinking out loud on paper. Tell me what you think he had written. Honest opinion. You are the smartest person I know. She looked at the sketch for a long moment. Then she looked at the glass walls of the copy room and at the 42nd floor, stretching away in both directions at the pale stone and the controlled light and the silence of a place designed to make people perform or break. She typed back, "It is beautiful. The water feature placement is perfect. Have dinner with me Saturday." He responded in 12 seconds. Already there. She gathered the scanned documents and walked back to her desk. The feeling in her chest did not go away. It rearranged itself into something she did not have a name for yet. Something that felt uncomfortably like the beginning of a choice she was not ready to make. Declan was standing at the window when she passed his office. His back was to her. His hands were in his pockets, and he was looking at the city in the look of a man regarding something he owned but could not hold on to. She moved past without stopping. She did not look back. She should have, because if she had, she would have seen that he was not looking at the city at all. He was watching her reflection in the glass, her shape moving across the floor behind him, growing smaller as she walked toward her desk. And his jaw was working against something that had no name yet either. Something that had cracked open 4 nights ago on a sidewalk he had no professional reason to be on. Watching another man tuck her hair back from her face with the easy certainty of someone who already knew what he had. The city spread out below him, and for the first time in a very long time, Declan Voss understood what it felt like to be too late. He just had not accepted it yet, and that refusal was going to change everything. The following Wednesday, he walked into the conference room where she was working alone. She was reorganizing the Devlin financing materials cross-legged on the chair, with her shoes off, her hair down from its usual arrangement, a highlighter in one hand and the term sheet in the other. She heard the door and moved fast. Feet down, posture reshuffled, but not fast enough. He had already seen her. Declan stood in the doorway. He looked at the documents spread across the table at her, at the evidence of a human being existing in a space rather than performing professionalism in it. Something moved across his face quick and then gone. "I am reorganizing the Devlin file," she said, which was not an apology. She decided that was correct. He came in. He sat down across from her, one seat over, close enough that she could see the exhaustion around his eyes. He did not reach for any of the documents. He just sat. This was unusual enough that she held still and waited. "The community development proposal," he said. "I am moving it forward. Your read on the corridor stabilization was accurate. I had the financial team run a full scenario analysis. The margin at year 7 is better than I expected. I told you it was not charity." "You did." He laid his hands flat on the table. "I want you to co-lead the project with Stellan. He handles the acquisition and construction side. You handle the community relations and the projection modeling." He looked up. "You understand the value case better than anyone on my team." She was aware of several things happening at once inside her chest. Something that felt like satisfaction. Something that felt like suspicion. And something underneath both of those that she did not want to examine directly. "Why?" she said. He frowned slightly. "I just explained. I know the reason you gave. I am asking for the real one." The silence that followed had pressure in it. He was looking at her now fully, and she was looking back, and neither of them was pretending to look at documents. "You are the most competent person on this floor," he said. The words came out flat and clean, like something that had been sitting somewhere too long and had finally been released. "You have been for 2 years. I have not acted accordingly." She held very still. "That is not an apology," she said. "No," he agreed, "it is not. It is a statement of fact. The apology is more complicated. I have time. Something crossed his face quick and almost involuntary, the look of a man who had not expected to be answered that way, and found it against his instincts impossible to dismiss. Will you co-lead the project, he asked. She thought about Joel's question across the restaurant table. Why do you stay? She thought about Stellan's warning in the copy room. Decide what you want before it decides for you, yes, she said. But I will be running the community side my way. If you have a problem with any decision I make, you come to me directly. You do not reroute through Stellan. You do not undermine me in front of the project team. Agreed, I mean it. I know you do, he said, without irritation, which was the strangest part. She gathered her highlighter in her notebook. She was halfway to the door when he said it. Quiet, almost too quiet. I saw you last Thursday, outside the restaurant on 72nd. She stopped. The room went very still around her. She did not turn immediately. She made herself breathe once, twice, let the information land without moving through her visibly. Then she turned. When she did, his expression was controlled, but not entirely. There was something unguarded at the edges, something that looked like it had cost him something to say. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady. 2 years of practice behind every syllable. The man with you, he said. Someone you are close to. It was not a question, but it was a question. His name is Joel, she said. He has been my friend since I was 9 years old. Is that all he is? The air in the room changed. She felt it, a shift in pressure in the texture of the silence between them. He was watching her with an intensity that did not match any conversation they had ever had. And she understood in that moment, with the uncomfortable clarity of something that could not be unseen, exactly what she was looking at. That is none of your business, she said. Measured. Every word placed deliberately. His jaw tightened. No, he said. It is not. Then I do not know why you asked. He had no answer for that. Or he had one and could not say it. She could see him making the choice, watching him decide which version of himself was going to occupy the next 10 seconds. And then he defaulted the way he always defaulted, back to the cold and the controlled, his face smoothing into the expression she had spent 2 years learning to read. Friday, he said. The framework, Friday, she said. She left. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood there with her heart moving faster than she wanted it to and her hands not entirely steady. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. Her phone buzzed as the doors closed. Joel, Saturday still on. I've found the best place. You are going to love it. She stared at the message. Then she looked at her reflection in the polished elevator doors. A woman holding too many things at once, whose face told more than she wanted it to, who had just been asked a question by the wrong man in the worst possible way, and had felt something answer inside her before she could stop it. She typed back Saturday, I will be there. The elevator reached the lobby. She walked out into the October night and pulled her coat tighter and did not think about Declan Voss until she was on the subway. And then she thought about him in the detached organizational way she usually did. Tomorrow's schedule, the comparable data Stellan was pulling, the community project framework she needed to have ready by Friday. Not about the way he had looked at her when he said her name, not about what she had felt when he did. But above her, on the 42nd floor of a building that bore his name, Declan Voss stood in an empty conference room with his hands on the back of a chair she had been sitting in an hour ago. The city outside the windows was doing nothing useful. He stood there in the silence of a man who had spent years constructing the perfect fortress and had just watched it become irrelevant. Not because anything dramatic had happened, but because she had said that is none of your business and been completely undeniably correct. And he had felt the accuracy of it like a structural failure, quiet and total and impossible to undo. He had asked anyway. That was the part that stayed with him. Not her answer. Her answer was exactly what it should have been. What stayed with him was that the question had come out of him before he made a decision to say it. He was not a man who said things before deciding to say them. He had built 2 entire lives on that premise. And then he had said, is that all he is? He put his hand flat on the table and looked at the city and understood with the brutal clarity of a man who was very intelligent and had just made a catastrophic mistake that he was standing at exactly the kind of crossroads that had destroyed him once before, from which he had never fully rebuilt. He did not sleep that night. The injunction arrived on a Friday afternoon at 4:53, timed with the precision of people who understood that the weekend was a weapon. Clara found out about it Monday morning at 6:15 when she stepped off the elevator and found the 42nd floor already lit and Stellan Kraft pacing the corridor outside Declan's office, like a man who had not slept and was no longer pretending otherwise. "How bad?" she said, setting her bag down. "Bad enough that he has been on the phone since 4 in the morning. Stellan ran a hand over his face. "The Kellner Group filed Friday afternoon, claims Voss Capital misrepresented the environmental assessment on the Jersey City parcel, specifically the submission date on the Phase 2 report." She pulled up the archive portal on her laptop without being asked. "What is the exposure? If it sticks, the acquisition gets delayed 18 months. That triggers a clause in the Devlin financing that lets them walk away from the table entirely. And the Devlin deal is worth $60 million at close," he said, "with upstream implications for 3 other projects in the pipeline. Does it stick? Our lawyers say no. Kellner's lawyers say yes. Everyone is billing $400 an hour to tell us contradictory things." He lowered his voice. "He needs everything. The original environmental report, the chain of correspondence with the county assessor's office, the internal memos from the site evaluation. Some of it is in the main archive. Some of it is still on the old server from before the migration." "Give me the Kellner filing number," Clara said. He gave it to her. She started pulling. Declan came out of his office 20 minutes later. He had clearly not slept. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, a tightness that lived differently than his usual controlled tension. His eyes landed on her screen before they landed on her. "You have the archive access," he said. "I am pulling it now. Environmental report is in the system. County correspondence is partially migrated, partially on the old server. I have flagged the unmigrated files for manual retrieval. They said 40 minutes. He looked at her for a beat longer than necessary, and something moved through his expression that was hard to read. Not gratitude exactly, something adjacent to it. The recognition that surfaces when you realize something has been working the whole time and you have not been paying attention to how. "Complete chronological file by 8, he said. "You will have it by 7:30. He went back into his office. Stellan exhaled slowly beside her. "I genuinely do not know how you do this." "I know where things are," she said simply, and kept working. She had the file to him at 7:22, complete, flagged, indexed by date and document type, with a cover page cross-referencing the Kellner filing claims against the documents that addressed each one. Declan was on the phone when she knocked and entered. He pointed at the desk without looking up. She set the file down and turned to leave. Still on the phone, he said, "Wait." She waited near the door. He wrapped up the call in 4 minutes, picked up the file, scanned the first 3 pages, flipped to the environmental report, checked her indexing against the Kellner claims. "They are challenging the Phase 2 assessment," he said. "The submission date. I noticed. I flagged it on page 4. The Phase 2 was completed October 12th. The county records show it was received October 14th. Kellner's filing claims it was not submitted until November 3rd, which would place it after the acquisition agreement was signed." She paused. "I pulled the certified mail receipt from the county assessor's archive. Delivered October 14th, signed for at 2:47 in the afternoon by a county clerk named Nora Devlin. I included a copy." Page 11. Declan turned to page 11. He looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then he closed the file. "Their entire filing is built on that date discrepancy," he said. "Yes, so it falls apart." "Yes, but your lawyers still need to formally respond, and the response needs to be filed by Tuesday noon. I can have a full document package ready for them by 9 this morning if you want to get ahead of the clock." He set the file flat on his desk. His hands rested on it. Then he looked at her with that expression again, the one that had been appearing since last week, the one that carried more weight than it used to. "Why do you keep doing that?" he said quietly. She blinked. "Doing what?" "The extra step. The certified receipt." Nora Devlin, his jaw moved slightly. "Nobody asked you to go that deep." She held his gaze. "No," she said. "Nobody did." A silence opened between them, dense with the pressure of 2 people standing on opposite sides of something they could both feel but neither had named. "Get the package to the lawyers by 9, he said. His voice was back in its usual register. "Yes." She started for the door. Clara. She stopped. He almost never used her name. The sound of it in his voice, even flat, even controlled, did something small and involuntary to her breathing. She turned. He was looking at the file, not at her. "Good work," he said. She left without responding. She walked to her desk, opened the notebook to the back page where she kept the tally and wrote it down. Then she sat there looking at the two entries. One from 14 months ago, one from this morning, and she tried to understand why the second one felt harder to receive than the first. She did not have an answer. She had a document package to build. It went to the lawyers at 8:51. By noon, the Kellner filing was effectively dead. The certified mail receipt signed by Nora Devlin at 2:47 on October 14th was not something that could be argued around. Kellner's legal team had built their challenge on a date that the county's own records contradicted, and once the response package Clara had assembled was filed, the structure collapsed without drama. By 2 in the afternoon, Stellan had told 3 people. By 3, the entire 42nd floor knew that Clara Holt had found a certified mail receipt from a county archive that had just preserved a $60 million acquisition. She found this out because people started looking at her differently. Not dramatically, it was subtler than that, people making eye contact when they had not before. Audrey Walsh stopping by her desk to ask with genuine curiosity how she had thought to check the certified mail records. Stellan leaving a good coffee on her desk without explanation. Small things, the kind that change the atmosphere of a floor without anyone announcing that it has changed. And Declan said nothing about it publicly, which was also a change because his silence now had a different texture. Before, his silence had been the silence of someone who expected performance and noticed only its failures. This silence was the silence of someone who was watching, carefully, from a closer distance than before. She felt it. She made the deliberate decision to call Joel on her lunch break and talk about the Brooklyn Park redesign for 35 minutes until the feeling settled into something she could work alongside without losing her footing. It helped. That was the problem. It helped too easily, which told her something about where she was standing and how close she was to an edge she had not chosen to approach. The following Monday arrived with a wrongness she felt before she could name it. Victor Hale was already there when she stepped off the elevator, which meant whatever this was had been happening since before dawn. Victor Hale was 61, gray-haired, who gave the impression of having outlasted a great many difficult things. He was standing outside the boardroom with the stillness of someone waiting for a conversation he did not want to have. He looked at her when she came through the doors, not at his phone, not at the document in his hand, at her. "Claire," he said, "come in." The boardroom had 4 people in it. Victor, Stellan, whose jaw was set in the careful arrangement of someone who had been told something and was still processing the implications. Raymond Cross, who handled the company's legal exposure and who had the practiced neutrality of a man who delivered difficult information for a living. And Declan. He was standing at the head of the table, not sitting, standing with both hands flat on the surface and his face in an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the controlled cold of his usual register. Something rawer than that, something that looked like it had been detonated from the inside and was still settling. On the table were documents, a great many of them spread across the polished surface in the way things were spread when someone had arrived in a hurry and laid them out before the room had time to prepare itself. Printed emails organized into a sequence, access logs, timestamps, a cover sheet from the company's internal IT security team. "Sit down," Declan said. Everyone sat. Everyone. Clara took the chair Stellan indicated 3 seats down from Declan and looked at the documents. She understood what she was looking at within 15 seconds. Internal communications, file access logs, a sequence that told a story, and the story had her name in it. Victor spoke first. He looked at Clara when he did not at Declan, which told her something about the geometry of what was happening. 6 weeks ago, he said someone accessed the internal server and pulled 3 sets of files: the Kellner response documents, the Devlin financing structure, the preliminary framework for the Jersey City acquisition. He paused. Those files were forwarded externally. The boardroom was absolutely silent. "Forwarded to whom?" Clara said. "To Kellner's legal team," Victor said. "And to a secondary address we have since identified as belonging to a consulting firm in Washington that has worked in the past for two of Voss Capital's primary competitors. She felt where the information was pointing before anyone said it directly. The way you felt a weight shifting toward you before it falls. When were the files accessed, she said. Raymond Cross answered. The access logs show 3 separate pulls over a 4-week period. He looked at her. The last one was 9 days ago. The credentials used were yours. The silence that followed was the kind that happened when something accusatory had been placed in a room and no one had decided yet which direction the next moment was going to go. Clara did not move. She did not look away from Raymond Cross. She let herself feel the full weight of what had just been said, and she made a decision in the space of 2 full seconds. She would not panic. She would not perform innocence because performed innocence looked like guilt, and she had done nothing wrong. Those are not my pulls, she said. I do not care what the log shows. I did not access those files. She turned to Victor. I know my own access history. I have not touched the Devlin financing structure in the internal archive. I work from the active project folder. I pulled the Kellner documents exactly once the morning of the crisis, and I did it in front of Stellan. She looked at Stellan directly. That is correct, Stellan said immediately. She pulled the Kellner file while I was standing next to her desk. One pull, Clara said, not 3, and I did not forward anything to anyone. She looked at Declan. He had not spoken since she sat down. He was still standing at the head of the table, still with his hands flat on the surface, and he was looking at her with that detonated expression. She understood what she was actually seeing. Not accusation, something worse than accusation. A man at war with himself. The old architecture activating before he could stop it, the machinery of distrust triggered by the sight of her name on an access log. Running the program it always ran when something looked like evidence of the thing he feared most. She could see him wanting to believe the logs. She could see him fighting it. Someone used my credentials, she said. She said it directly to him, not to the room, to him. I do not know how, I do not know who, but I need you to look at me and tell me honestly whether you believe I did this. The room held its breath. Declan's hands pressed flat on the table. He looked at her for a long moment, and the weight of that look carried everything she had watched build in his face over the past weeks, and something older than that, something structural and damaged and not yet resolved. Then he said to Raymond, pull the physical access logs, building entry and exit timestamps, cross-reference them against the file pull times. Raymond blinked. That will take a few hours. Yes, Declan straight buttoned. Do it. He looked at Victor. Nobody contacts Kellner. Nobody speaks to the Devlin partners. Nothing leaves this room. Get me IT security. Then he looked at Clara. It was the briefest look, and it carried everything. The fight he was having with himself. The history behind it. The damage of a man who had been betrayed before and built a fortress around that experience and was now standing in the rubble of the fortress with his hands still raised to defend something that had already come apart. You are not suspended, he said. You are not removed from the project. A pause, the length of a full breath. But until the cross-reference comes back, I need you to work from the secondary floor. Clara stood. She picked up nothing from the table because she had brought nothing to the table. Fine, she said. But when the cross-reference clears me, and it will, we are going to have a very different conversation. She walked to the door, 15 steps. Every muscle she had built over 2 years in this building was deployed in those 15 steps. Posture, pace, the stillness in her hands. Nothing that could be read as fear. Nothing that could be read as guilt. She pulled the door open. Clara, she did not turn around. She had turned around too many times in too many doorways in this building, and every time she did, it cost her something. She kept walking. Behind her in the boardroom, Declan Voss stood with his hands on a table covered in evidence that might be real or might be constructed, looking at the door she had just walked through and understanding with the brutal clarity of a very intelligent man who had just made a catastrophic mistake that he was standing at exactly the kind of crossroads that had destroyed him once before. The secondary floor was quieter than the 42nd, used mostly for overflow staff and visiting consultants, and at 6:45 on a Monday morning, it was nearly empty. Clara found an unoccupied desk near the window, sat down, her bag, opened her laptop, and pulled up the community project framework. She did not call Joel. She did not call her sister in Philadelphia, who would have told her immediately and with great conviction to collect her things and leave. She sat with the accusation alone, the way she had learned to sit with most things in this building, and she did the work in front of her because the work was real and the accusation was not, and she knew the difference even if the boardroom had not. An hour passed, then another. She worked on the community project timeline and thought about the logs and thought about who had access to her access. She thought about the open plan layout of the 42nd floor, about the dozen small moments every day when her screen was visible to anyone walking past, about the routine emails she opened without thinking, because routine was how you moved through a day that contained 400 of them. She thought about the particular chill of understanding that someone had been watching her work for weeks, not casually, deliberately. Someone had sat in that building and learned her schedule and her access patterns and her habits well enough to construct a trap using her name as the foundation. The thoughts settled in her chest like cold water. Not panic, just the clear-eyed recognition of having been hunted without knowing it. She opened a new document and began writing. The logical structure of what had happened. The steps. The gaps. The questions that pointed toward who had commissioned the attack and how they had known which files to take. She wrote until the framework was clear, then she read it back to herself and made 2 corrections. Then she saved it. At 2:47 in the afternoon, she heard the elevator. She kept her eyes on her screen until Stellan was standing beside her desk. Then she looked up and his face told her everything before he said a word. Physical log shows you not in the building during 2 of the 3 pull windows, he said. The first pull happened on a Tuesday evening at 9:14. You badged out at 6:53. There is a gap of over 2 hours between your exit and the file access. He sat down in the empty chair beside her. The third pull was a Saturday morning. Building records show you never badged in that day. She nodded once. The tightness in her chest did not fully release. It shifted, became something different. Someone cloned my credentials, she said. IT security is working on the mechanism. The leading theory is a session token harvested from a phishing attempt. You may have clicked something routine, a redirect, a document, preview link that captured the token without triggering any visible breach alert. I open a lot of links for research, she said. It would not need to be obvious. Stellan's voice was level. Whoever did this knew your schedule, knew your access level, and knew which files were worth taking. He looked at her directly. This was not opportunistic, he said. Someone targeted you specifically. The words settled in the room between them. She said, because I am the highest access non-partner in the building. Yes, you touch everything. If someone wanted a clean credential set to pull sensitive documents without leaving executive-level fingerprints, you were the logical choice. He paused. It also means someone knew enough about your habits and your access patterns to plan this across multiple weeks. Kellner, she said, we believe so. Or someone working for them, possibly through the DC firm. Stellan leaned forward. Declan has had a private investigator on it since 2 o'clock. Since 2? She repeated. Stellan looked at her steadily. The cross-reference started at 2:47. He retained the investigator at 2 o'clock. She looked at her laptop screen. At the community project framework she had been building for the past 4 hours. He did not wait for the cross-reference to finish, she said. No, Stellan said. He did not. She was quiet for a moment. Where is he now? 42nd floor. He has been on the phone with the investigator and with legal since 2. He asked me to come down. He sent you. He asked me. Stellan made the distinction carefully the way he always made distinctions. There is a difference. Clara closed her laptop. Tell him I will be at my desk in the morning. She picked up her bag. And tell him the conversation I mentioned still needs to happen. She went home. She changed out of her work clothes and stood in her kitchen and ate crackers and cheese over the counter because she did not have the patience for a plate. And she thought about the word targeted and what it meant that someone had spent weeks building a trap using her name, her credentials, her routines, her predictability. She had never thought of herself as someone with enemies. She was an executive assistant. She was thorough and reliable and present in the way that competent support staff were supposed to be present, functional, and accountable, but not exposed. She had not thought exposure was something that happened to people in her position. She was learning. Her phone lit up. Joel. She let it ring. She watched the screen go dark and stood in her kitchen and let herself feel the full weight of the day. The boardroom, the accusation, Stellan's careful face, the fact that Declan had hired an investigator before the cross-reference was complete, which meant he had been searching for the truth before he had committed to believing her, which was not the same as believing her, but was not nothing either. She paid the cost of the day quietly and alone, which was how she had always paid things. Tuesday morning, she was at her desk at 6:40. She found three things waiting: a full IT security report on the credential compromise, a preliminary findings memo from the private investigator, and a calendar invitation from Declan for an 8 o'clock meeting, subject line reading only correction. She read the IT report first. The session token exploit had been traced to an email 3 weeks prior. A document preview link disguised as a vendor communication, the kind that arrived in her inbox 20 times a week in slightly different forms. The token had been harvested silently. The session cloned. The file accesses conducted through a masked routing address traced to a server in Delaware. Professional in the way that required both money and specific knowledge of which credentials were worth the investment. The investigator's memo was 4 pages. She read it carefully. The DC consulting firm had a traceable relationship with 2 former Kellner executives. The email address used to register the firm's secondary account, the one that had received the forwarded files, had been created 11 days before the Kellner injunction was filed. Someone had anticipated that Voss Capital's response to the injunction would require the exact files that had been stolen and had arranged to receive copies the moment they were pulled. She read the last 2 pages. The investigator had identified Rowan Fitch, a former mid-level operations manager at Kellner Group, who had been quietly let go 8 months prior, following a restructuring that had significantly affected his compensation. The DC consulting firm had a registered address matching a property Fitch had listed as a business address on a professional networking profile. The connection was traceable, and the logical chain it formed matched almost exactly the framework she had written herself the afternoon before in the quiet of the secondary floor. She looked at what she had written. She looked at what the investigator had written. The same steps, the same gaps, the same questions answered in the same sequence. She had gotten there first. She was on the last page of the memo when the private elevator opened at the far end of the floor and Declan walked out. He was looking at her before he had fully crossed the floor. Not the way he had looked at her for 2 years, with the flat assessment that measured without revealing the standard. He was looking at her the look reserved for something nearly lost, with an attention that had no pretense of casualness left in it. He stopped at the edge of her desk. He did not go to his office first. "I'm sorry," he said. Just that. 2 words. No preamble, no construction, no professional framing to make it easier to say or easier to receive. Just the plain thing. She held his gaze. "For which part specifically?" she said. "For the boardroom." His jaw moved. "For asking you to move floors before the evidence was complete." "Before," she repeated. "Meaning the moment the credential logs surfaced, your first instinct was to separate me from the work. Not to ask me what happened. Not to give me the room to explain. To contain me." He did not flinch. "Yes, that is not a small thing. I know. That is 2 years of something coming out in one moment. That is the version of you that was already waiting to believe the worst. And the moment something looked like evidence, it ran." He was very still. "Yes," he said again. The floor was beginning to fill around them. Other early arrivals filtering in. None of them were looking at this particular corner. Or if they were doing it carefully. "The 8 o'clock meeting," she said. "I want to explain something," he said. "Not to justify what I did. To explain where it comes from." He paused. "If you are willing to hear it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee. 8 o'clock, she said. "I will be there." The meeting was in his office with the door closed, just the 2 of them. No conference table between them. No audience. No professional staging. He stood by the window. She sat in one of the chairs near his desk. He told her about Diana Crane. He had not planned to use her name. She could tell because the name came out differently than the rest of it, more compressed, more careful, the way names came out when you had spent a long time not saying them. Diana Crane had been his operational partner 8 years ago. Not just professionally, he said, though his voice suggested the line between the two had not been as clear as he would have preferred. She had been the person he trusted with everything, the complete interior of both his worlds, the documented and the undocumented. He had trusted her completely and without reservation, which he said the way someone said something they had spent years understanding was the mistake. She had been working with a rival organization the entire time, 18 months of it, feeding information, building a case, positioning herself to dismantle everything he had built from the inside. When it fell apart fast and completely. Three people who worked for him were hurt in ways that could not be undone. He said all of this looking at the window, not at her. I rebuilt everything, he said. The company, the operations, the structure. A pause. Everything except the part that got broken. The part that trusts people who are close, Clara said. He turned from the window. Yes, you are the closest person to my work that I have allowed in 6 years. And when those logs surfaced, something just... He stopped. His jaw was tight. It ran the old program. Before I could stop it, she looked at him. She thought about 2 years of impossible standards and cold silences and withheld acknowledgments. She thought about Diana Crane and the damage that kind of betrayal left behind, the way it rewired the wiring, the way it made proximity feel like exposure. You should have told me this, she said. Not now, earlier. When you hired me and decided you were going to manage me like a potential threat. I know. I spent 2 years thinking I was not good enough. Her voice stayed level, but there was something harder in it now. I kept a notebook. I tracked every time you acknowledged my work because it happened so rarely that I needed documentation to remind myself it had actually occurred. Do you understand what that does to a person? Not just to her confidence, to the way she understands her own worth, the way she moves through a room. He looked at her. She could see the impact of it, the weight of a consequence named out loud by the person who had lived it, which was different from knowing abstractly that you had caused harm. Yes, he said, almost inaudible. I am not asking you to have been someone different, she said. I understand what happened to you. I understand why the wiring is the way it is. But I need you to understand that your damage is not my responsibility to absorb. I am not a test you get to run until you decide whether I pass. He said nothing. He stood there and received it, which was perhaps the most significant thing she had seen him do. Not deflection, not construction, just the plain receiving of a consequence he had earned. The community project, she said after a moment, I am still co-leading it. Yes. And the conversation about how this office operates, how you operate specifically with me, that is not finished. No, he agreed, it is not. She stood. She smoothed the front of her jacket. She was almost to the door when he said her name again, with that quality in it that cost him that he could not entirely manage. She turned. This time she turned. He was looking at her from across the room with an expression that had nothing managed in it, nothing calibrated, nothing of the fortress remaining, just a man standing in the space where the fortress used to be looking at her like she was the thing on the other side of everything he had built to keep himself safe. I need you to know, he said, that I did not believe you did it. Not truly, I did not believe it when the log surfaced. I acted out of fear and not out of conviction. And that is the most honest thing I can tell you about what happened in that boardroom. The room was very quiet. I know she said. She left. What happened in the next 72 hours happened fast, and with the efficiency of things that have been built to a breaking point and are now breaking in the correct direction. By Wednesday evening, the investigators' work had converged on Rowan Fitch. The financial motivation, the technical capability, the traceable relationship with the DC consulting firm, the timing of the secondary email address created 11 days before the injunction was filed. Fitch, when confronted by Declan's legal team with the evidence assembled across 48 hours of work, including the logical framework Clara had written on the secondary floor, that the investigator had independently confirmed, made the decision to cooperate rather than absorb the consequences alone. By Thursday morning, Kellner's legal team had received a letter. Stellan described it in the elevator as the kind of correspondence that made lawyers reconsider their client relationships. By Thursday afternoon, the injunction had been voluntarily withdrawn. By Thursday evening, the Devlin financing partners had been briefed, reassured, and recommitted. By Friday morning, the Jersey City acquisition was back on track. The community development project had been formally greenlit with Clara and Stellan as co-leads, and the 42nd floor had the atmosphere of a place where a serious thing had nearly happened and then had not. Clara sat at her desk and processed all of it and felt underneath the relief something she had not finished sorting. Something about the confession in his office. Something about the name Diana Crane said carefully toward a window. Something about a man who could run an empire and still could not stop himself from flinching in the direction of an old scar. That Friday evening, almost everyone gone the floor, quiet and amber-lit, Stellan stopped at her desk on his way out. "You know what you did," he said. It was not a question. "I have not done anything," she said. "You stayed." He looked at her directly. "For 2 years you stayed and you did the work and you pushed back when it mattered." He paused, and he had to live next to that until he could not maintain the alternative. Most people would have left. Most people did. "I know," she said. "I thought about it." "Why did you not?" She thought about it honestly, because I could see something real underneath everything else she said. "And I did not want to leave before I found out if I was right." Stellan looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once the way careful men nodded when something had been said correctly and walked to the elevator. Clara turned back to her screen. Across the floor through the glass of his office, she could see the outline of Declan at his desk, the amber light making him look for a moment like a man who was simply working. Not an empire, not a fortress, just a man at a desk at the end of a long week trying to figure out what came next. She looked at the community project timeline on her screen. Then she kept working because the work was real and it was hers, and she was going to make sure it outlasted every other complicated thing happening on this floor. The morning after Declan came to her desk first, not his office, not through Stellan. He came to her desk and stood there in the stillness of a man who had made a decision in the dark and was now standing in the daylight with it. She looked up from her screen. "I am sorry," he said. He had said it yesterday in his office. This was different. Yesterday had been in a closed room with an explanation waiting behind it. This was the open floor, the 42nd floor, with 3 people already at their desks within earshot. This version cost something to say. She set down her pen. "For which part specifically?" she said. He did not look away. "For the boardroom, for the secondary floor. For making you prove something you should never have been asked to prove." He paused. "For the 2 years before any of that." She looked at him. She thought about the notebook in her drawer and the 2 entries and the wide, empty space between them. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Not to make you feel worse. As information." He waited. "I kept a notebook," she said. "I tracked every time you acknowledged my work in 2 years, not as a record of grievance, as evidence. I needed documentation to remind myself that it had actually happened, because it happened rarely enough that without the written record, I would have started to doubt my own perception of the job I was doing." She held his gaze. "Do you understand what that does to a person over time? What it does to the way they move through a room, the way they talk about their own work, the way they decide what they are worth?" He looked at her. She could see the impact of it moving through him, not as abstraction, but as the weight of a consequence named by the person who had carried it. "Yes," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I am not asking you to have been someone different," she said. "I understand where it came from. You told me yesterday and I believed you. But understanding where a thing comes from does not mean it did not cause damage. Those are 2 separate facts, and I need you to hold both of them." He held both of them. She could see him doing it, the discipline of a man who wanted to defend himself and was choosing not to. "The community project," she said, after a moment, "it stays mine to run, yes. If you have a problem with any decision I make on the community side, you come to me directly, adult to adult. No cold silences, no rerouting through Stellan, no correction via sticky note on a revised deck." "Agreed. And if something ever looks like evidence against me again, you ask me one question before you act on it. One question. That is all it takes." "Agreed." She picked up her pen. "I will have the updated project timeline on your desk by end of day." He nodded. He started to turn away. Then he stopped. "The notebook," he said. He was looking at a point somewhere past her shoulder. "I would like to know someday what else is in it." She considered that. Then she said, "Earn it." He looked at her then. Something moved through his expression that was not amusement, not surprise, something more interior than either of those. the look of a man who had expected a door to be closed and had found it very slightly open. He went to his office. Clara turned back to her screen and sat with her hands in her lap for a moment before she started typing. Through the glass of his office, she could see him at his desk, head bent, already working. She looked at the glass for 3 seconds. Then she opened the community project file and got to work. She called Joel that evening from her apartment, not the West Village restaurant. That conversation needed to happen in person. But she called and she let him talk and she listened to his voice describing the progress on the Brooklyn Park, the native grasses going in along the south perimeter, the way the water feature was going to catch the afternoon light, and she felt the warmth of him, the steadiness, and the way he had always been someone who told her true things. After a while, he asked how she was. Better, she said, which was true, and also complicated. He was quiet in the way he was quiet when he was receiving information, rather than waiting to respond. Do you want to tell me what complicated means, he said. Not yet, she said. Soon. Okay, he said. I am here. I know, she said. She hung up and sat in her apartment in the November quiet and thought about what soon meant and what it was going to point to. She thought about it for a long time. She did not arrive at an answer that night, but she woke up the next morning knowing what she needed to do, which was its own kind of answer. The West Village restaurant had the same chalkboard menu and the same practical candles and the warmth that came from a place that had been the same place for 30 years and intended to stay that way. Joel was already there when she arrived. He stood up when he saw her. She sat down across from him and looked at him in the candlelight at his open face and his honest eyes, and she did not build toward it or frame it carefully or soften it with preamble. I think you already know what I am going to say, she said. Something moved through his face. Not surprise. The confirmation of something he had been holding at a careful distance. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I do. I am sorry. He shook his head. Do not apologize for this. You did not choose to feel what you feel. He picked up his water glass and turned it in his hand. Is it resolved yet, what you feel? Not entirely, she said, but I know what it is now. I was not letting myself know before. He looked at her steadily. And him, is he the same man he was 3 months ago? She thought about it honestly. No, she said, or maybe he always was underneath, and I can finally see the part underneath. Joel was quiet for a moment. The restaurant moved around them, other people's conversations weaving through the space. Is he going to be good to you? He said. It was a simple question, direct and without performance, the kind only someone who genuinely cared about the answer could ask without it sounding like anything else. I do not know yet, she said, but I think he is going to try in a way he has not tried anything in a long time. Joel nodded slowly. He looked at the table. Then he looked at her with the open face of someone making a choice, choosing generosity over grief, which was the hardest choice, making it without being asked and without requiring credit for it. Then I hope it is everything, he said. I mean that. No performance. I genuinely hope it is everything. She reached across the table and put her hand over his for a moment. He turned his hand over and squeezed once and let go. Clean and final and dignified. And she understood in that moment that Joel Mercer was one of the finest people she had ever known, and that some things could be entirely true without being the thing you chose. They had dinner. Real dinner. He talked about the Brooklyn Park, and she talked about the community project, and they laughed twice, and the evening had a bittersweet quality that neither of them tried to fix because some things were exactly as heavy as they were supposed to be. He hugged her at the subway entrance, long and real. Same deal as always, he said into her hair. I am not going anywhere. Just somewhere slightly different. She pulled back and looked at him. You are a good man, Joel. I know, he said with a small smile that was entirely his. Go figure out your life. She went down the subway steps and did not look back. When the train came, she sat with her hands in her lap and thought about what it meant to choose the harder thing over the easier thing, and why the harder thing so often felt more like herself. Monday arrived with a community project in a building full of people pretending not to notice that something had shifted on the 42nd floor. The shift was not dramatic. It was in the texture of things, the way Declan stopped using silence as a response to things that deserved words. The way he began coming to her desk with questions that were actual questions rather than tests in disguise. The way he said in the Thursday briefing, looking at Audrey Walsh's analysis, that is right, in a tone that did not appear to cost him anything visible, though she knew it had required something to arrive at. Audrey Walsh had the expression of someone who had been bracing for impact and kept not being hit. Clara watched it and made no comment. She had learned that the surest way to make a fragile thing break was to name it too early. What she did instead was work. She built the community project framework into something real with actual structure and actual relationships with the block associations and neighborhood organizations in Jersey City. She called people herself. She showed up to a preliminary meeting with the Block Association Board on a Wednesday evening in November and sat in a room above a hardware store and listened to people talk about what they needed and what they had been promised before and what they had learned to expect from developers who arrived with glossy renderings and left with approvals. She took notes. She did not promise anything she could not deliver. The event arrived on the third Saturday of December. Clara had been there since 7 in the morning, folding tables set up in the community center on the ground floor of the proposed development site, coffee and pastries from 3 local businesses on the block, representatives from 7 neighborhood organizations, a long wall of butcher paper where residents could write and draw and pin things where they could say what they wanted the space to become without a developer standing at a podium explaining it to them first. No presentations, no slide decks, no suits at the front of the room outlining a vision to people who had not been asked for theirs. Stellan arrived at 8 and helped without being asked. At 9:15, when the doors opened, the first people through were 2 elderly women from the Block Association who looked at the coffee table and the paper wall and said, with the relief of people who have been disappointed before and are surprised to find they have not been disappointed again, "Oh, it is actually for us." Declan arrived at 10. He did not arrive with anyone. No assistant, no legal counsel, no senior partners to provide the institutional backdrop that made developers look legitimate and communities look like problems to be managed. He arrived alone in a coat that was not quite right for the December cold, and he stood in the doorway of the community center for a moment and looked at the room. Clara watched him see it. She watched him see the paper wall with its accumulating drawings and handwritten words, the children running between the tables, the residents talking to each other, and to the project team with the ease of people who felt they were actually being listened to. She watched him understand it not as a concept he had approved in a meeting, but as a room full of human beings who were already becoming invested in something that had not been built yet. He walked over to her. "This is what you meant," he said. Yes, he looked at the paper wall. A child had drawn an enormous tree in the middle of what was probably the planned courtyard. Someone else had written in careful block letters, "A place where the kids can breathe." He looked at it for a moment. "Introduce me," he said, "not as Voss Capital, not with the company title, just as the person who is building it." He paused. "They should know who is responsible. Not the company. Me." She looked at him. "And because you were right," he said quietly, "it matters who makes the call." She thought about the block association calls he had made himself. The way he had shown up here alone on a Saturday morning in a coat that was not warm enough. "This is Declan Voss," she said to the room when the moment came. "He is building this project. He is here to listen." He shook hands. He listened. He was not smooth about it. He asked questions that were too direct and stood slightly too straight for a community center on a Saturday morning. But he was genuine, and people could feel the difference between genuine and performed, even when genuine was a little awkward around the edges. Bernard Cole found him near the coffee table 20 minutes in. Bernard was 63 years old and had lived on the block for 31 years, and he had the wariness of someone who had watched developers come and go and had learned to measure their promises against their departures. He cornered Declan and talked at him for the better part of 20 minutes. Drainage problems, parking, the way developers promised green space and then built over it when the approvals came through and the neighborhood objections were no longer legally relevant. Declan listened to all of it. He asked 2 questions. He wrote something in the small notebook he had apparently brought, which Clara noticed from across the room, and felt something complicated about the feeling of watching someone try in a way they had not tried before. At one point, Bernard gestured at the paper wall at the child's enormous tree and said, "That is what I want to see. Not a rendering, not an amenity, something that is still there in 20 years. Declan looked at the drawing. "I will make sure it is in the design," he said, "not as a feature, as a requirement. Bernard looked at him for a moment with the careful assessment of a man who had been given promises before. Then he nodded slowly and moved on to talk to Stellan about the drainage specifications. Clara came to stand beside Declan a few minutes later. "He is not what I expected," Bernard had said to her earlier. "No," she had told him, "he is not." Declan looked at the paper wall. He looked at the child's tree and the block letters that said, "A place where the kids can breathe," and something in his face was doing the quiet thing it occasionally did now, the loosening the expression of a man learning slowly and with some difficulty to let things matter in ways he could not control. "My mother worked in Midtown," he said. She waited. She cleaned offices, 4 nights a week, sometimes 5. He was still looking at the paper wall. "I used to wait for her in the lobbies of the building she finished, doing homework on a folding chair. Whatever building she was in, whatever lobby would let a kid sit for a couple of hours without asking him to leave." He paused. "The first property Voss Capital ever built," he said. "It was on the block where she used to park her cart before her shift." He said it quietly, not performing it, just saying the thing that had been true for a long time and had not been said out loud before. "I have never told anyone that," he said. She looked at him. She thought about a boy on a folding chair in a lobby, watching his mother work. She thought about what that boy had built and what he had broken in the building of it and what might still be salvageable. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He nodded once. They stood together looking at the paper wall for a moment. Then Bernard came back with a question about the below-market housing units, and Declan turned to answer it, and the morning continued around them, ordinary and real, and accumulating towards something that neither of them was naming yet. The weeks that followed were 3 months of proof, not declaration, not promise. Proof the kind that arrived in small, repeated actions rather than single dramatic moments, and that accumulated the way trust accumulated, slowly and without announcement, one decision at a time. He called her directly when he had a concern about the project. Not through Stellan, not via a sticky note. He walked to her desk or picked up the phone and said, "I have a question about this," and he waited for her to respond. He said in a December meeting in front of Raymond Cross and 2 senior partners that the corridor stabilization model Clara had developed for the community project was the most accurate long-range analysis the development division had produced in 3 years. He said it without preamble and without making it about himself, and Raymond Cross looked briefly surprised and then carefully neutral. Clara wrote nothing in the notebook. It was not the kind of thing that needed to be documented anymore. In January, when a complication arose with the below-market housing component and a city councilman's office began making noise about permit timelines, Declan asked Clara what she thought they should do before he asked anyone else. She told him. He did what she said. The complication resolved in 11 days. Audrey Walsh stopped flinching when Declan entered the room. Stellan started arriving at Monday briefings with the ease of someone who had stopped bracing for the kind of difficulty that had defined the floor for years. Clara watched all of it and made no comment and kept working. One evening in late January, she was finishing the project timeline when Declan came out of his office and stopped in front of her. The floor was nearly empty. The amber light from the city outside the windows was doing what it did at that hour, making everything look exactly as significant as it was. "Go home," he said. "I am almost done. It will be the same file tomorrow." She looked up. He was in his shirt sleeves, jacket left somewhere in his office, and he looked tired in the human way he occasionally allowed himself, and now not the controlled exhaustion of his usual presentation, but something more unguarded. "The neighborhood event," she said. "I have been thinking about the opening remarks. I do not want a formal address. I want you to talk about the block where your mother parked her cart. Not as a story, as a reason." He was quiet for a moment. "You want me to say it publicly. I want the people who are about to trust this project with their neighborhood to understand why the person building it is someone they can believe." He looked at her for a long moment. The floor hummed around them. "All right," he said. She saved the file and closed her laptop. "There is something else," he said. His voice was different. Not the command register, not the management tone. The other register, the one that had been appearing with increasing frequency since November. She waited. "The things you said about the notebook," he said. "About 2 years," he met her eyes. "I have been thinking about it since you said it, and I will keep thinking about it. I do not know how to undo 2 years, but I intend to find out if it can be rebuilt." She looked at him. He was standing closer than their usual professional distance, close enough that she could see the way something lived in his expression that had not been there when she started this job and had been accumulating quietly and without permission ever since. You would have to do it without the walls, she said. I know. Every time something looks like it might be evidence of the old thing, you cannot run the old program. You have to stop. You have to ask, I know. And I am not Diana Crane. She said it clearly, not as an accusation, but as a fact that needed to exist in the air between them as plainly as any other fact. I have never been her. I will never be her. You cannot ask me to carry the weight of what she did. His throat moved. Something passed through his face that was the closest thing to undone she had ever seen in him. You are nothing like her, he said. You never were. The floor hummed around them. Outside the windows, Manhattan was doing what it always did, relentless and lit and entirely indifferent to the weight of two people standing in an office trying to calculate what things cost and whether the numbers would ever come out even. She went home. She made tea and sat on her couch in the Friday quiet and let everything that had happened exist in the same space without trying to organize it. She texted Joel, I am okay, I need to tell you something. Not tonight, can we talk this week? He responded in a few minutes, whenever you are ready, I am here. She set the phone down and understood with a clarity that arrived without drama that what she felt for Joel was real and deep and genuinely not the same as what had been cracking open in her chest every time Declan said her name. Those were two different things. She had known it for weeks and had been hoping they were the same because the same would have been safer. She let herself feel the sadness of knowing she was going to ask someone to absorb a disappointment they had not earned. She let herself feel it fully because it deserved to be felt. Then she went to bed and slept for 9 hours and woke up with something that felt cautiously like ground under her feet. The rooftop of Voss Capitol Tower on a clear March evening had the city spread out below it in all its unreasonable beauty. The grid of lights, the river catching them, the bridge cables drawn against the dark like something architectural and deliberate. Declan had asked her to come up. No reason given. She had come. He was standing near the edge when she arrived, hands in his coat pockets looking at the city with an expression she recognized, but which was different now from how it had been. 6 months ago, that expression had been the look of a man watching something diminish. This was the look of someone who had stopped bracing for loss. She stood beside him. The wind came off the river. They looked at the city together for a while without saying anything, which was something they had learned to do, to be in the same silence without it meaning something was wrong. I want to offer you a partnership, he said. She looked at him. Not a title, not a compensation adjustment. He turned to face her. An equal stake in the development division. Your name on the projects as co-principal. He paused. The community project is the beginning of a division I want to build, and I want to build it with you leading half of it. Not under me. Beside me. She held his gaze. That is the professional part. Yes, he held her gaze. The other part is harder to say. Say it anyway. He looked at her. The city was behind him and the wind moved between them, and he was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she could hear the distance in it, the particular silence of a man choosing his words. Not because he was being careful, but because he was making sure what he said was true. I have been in love with you, he said, for longer than I was willing to admit to myself. And I spent that time making it as difficult as possible for you to stay, because staying meant I would eventually have to be honest about it. And being honest about it meant trusting someone again at a level I had decided I was done with. She held very still. The wind moved through her coat. The city spread below them, lit and indifferent, doing what it always did. You made it difficult, she said. That is a significant understatement. I know. I cried twice. In the bathroom stalls on this floor. She said it without apology, without softening it, because it needed to be said in plain language. I cried twice and I almost quit 4 times, and I stayed because I was stubborn enough to refuse to let it beat me. And for a long time I thought the thing I was fighting was your standards. She paused. It was not your standards. No, he said, it was not. It was your fear. And I absorbed the cost of that fear for 2 years without knowing what I was absorbing. His eyes were steady on hers. Yes, and I cannot give you those 2 years back, he said. I can only tell you what I will do differently and then do it. She looked at him for a long moment on the top of the building he had built on the block where his mother used to park her cart with the city spread out below them and 3 months of proof behind them. I have conditions, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not resistance, recognition. Tell me. I will never be managed, she said. If you have a concern about my work or my judgment, you come to me directly. No cold silences, no withholding, no sending me away when your fear kicks in. Agreed. If something ever looks like evidence against me, you ask me before you act on it. One question. That is all it takes. Agreed. The project stays mine. You do not revise it, redirect it, or overrule it without coming through me first. It was your idea from the beginning, he said. It should always have been yours. She held his gaze. I am not forgiving everything tonight. I want to be clear about that. 2 years is not something that resolves on a rooftop. This is a beginning. If you mean what you have said, it is a beginning, and I will be watching. Not from a place of suspicion, from a place of having learned not to assume good faith without evidence of it. That is exactly where you should be standing, he said. I have not earned anything else. She looked at him for another moment. Tell me something true about yourself, she said. Not about the company, not about any of this. Something I do not know. He looked at her. Something in his face did the quiet thing it did now, sometimes the expression of a man trying on openness, like something he had not worn in years. The folding chair, he said, the one I used to sit on in the lobbies. I still have it. It is in storage. I have moved it 11 times. He looked at the city for a moment. I do not know why I have never thrown it away. I think I keep it because it was the only thing in those years that was completely mine. She looked at him and thought about a boy on a folding chair doing homework in midnight lobbies while his mother worked, and what that boy had built and what it had cost him and what was still being built now, carefully and without announcement, one decision at a time. Thank you, she said, for telling me that. He nodded once. Yes to the partnership, she said, the professional one. I want it in writing by end of week. The corner of his mouth moved. Done. And yes to the other part. She held his gaze. But you should know, I will hold you to every single thing you have said tonight, not as punishment, as a standard. I know, he said. I am counting on it. She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned back to the city, and after a beat, he turned back to it too. And they stood there together in the cold March air with Manhattan laid out below them like something enormous and improbable, like proof that things built carefully over time on honest ground had a chance of lasting. The community project broke ground in February. There was a small ceremony, not the kind with ribbons and speeches from a podium, but the real kind with the block association and the neighborhood organizations and Bernard Cole standing in a hard hat, looking suspicious, but present in the way of someone who had decided to give something one more chance. Declan spoke for 4 minutes. He did not use a script. He talked about the block where his mother used to park her cart before her shift, and what he owed to the idea that a place could be built to last and to serve rather than to extract and move on. He talked about a folding chair in a lobby and the education of watching someone work with dignity in a building that did not see her. He talked about what it meant to build something that the people living inside it could recognize as theirs. He said it without flourish and without performance, and with the slightly uneven rhythm of a man saying something true in public for the first time. Bernard Cole, who had been standing with his arms crossed since the ceremony started, uncrossed them somewhere around the 3rd minute. He did not make a production of it. He just let his arms fall to his sides and stood there listening with the open posture of someone who had decided provisionally and without announcement that this might be different from the other times. Clara stood at the edge of the small crowd and watched Declan talk about his mother in public and felt the full weight of everything it had taken to get here. The 2 years, the bathroom stalls, the notebook with its 2 entries, the boardroom and the secondary floor, and the name Diana Crane said quietly toward a window, the note in his handwriting on heavy paper. The corner table at the West Village restaurant where Joel had squeezed her hand once and let go with the dignity of someone who understood the difference between what was true and what you chose. She thought about what Stellan had said about staying. She thought about what Joel had said about choosing the right thing over the safe thing. She thought about courage not as a single moment, but as a practice, something you had to choose again and again in small, ordinary moments, most of them invisible to everyone except yourself. When the ceremony ended, Declan found her at the edge of the crowd. He looked at her with the expression she had stopped trying to decode, the one that only appeared when no one else was watching, the one that had no management left in it. "You are cold," he said. "It is February. You should have worn the heavier coat. You should have told me that before I left this morning." She paused. "I did not leave from my own apartment this morning." He looked at her. The implications settled between them, simple and real. "No," he said, "you did not." Something in his face did the quiet thing, the loosening the expression of a man who had learned slowly and with considerable difficulty to let things matter in ways he could not control, and had stopped fighting that learning. The groundbreaking mud was on everyone's shoes. Bernard Cole was talking to Stellan about the drainage specifications with the engaged specificity of someone who had been listened to and intended to hold people to it. A child from the block was standing at the edge of the cleared site, looking at the space with the seriousness of someone imagining what it would become. Across the river, a design team was finalizing plans for a courtyard. At the center of those plans was a tree, an actual tree placed where a child had drawn one on butcher paper in a community center in December there, because Clara Holt had looked at that drawing and understood that it was not a decoration, but a requirement, and had written it into the project specifications as such. That was the part that lasted. Not the empire, not the war over a certified mail receipt, not the cold mornings or the boardroom or the old wounds that had taken so long to name. What lasted was the choice to build something worth standing inside, to stop protecting yourself from the cost of trust and start paying it carefully and honestly, the way you paid anything that mattered, in the small daily increments that no one witnessed, but that added up over time into something that held. Declan Voss had learned that. It had cost him everything it was supposed to cost. And standing in the February cold beside the woman who had stayed long enough to make it possible, he found that the cost in the end was exactly what it was supposed to be. Not a penalty, not a loss, the fair price of something real. Clara looked at the child at the edge of the cleared site, still looking at the open ground, still imagining. She thought about a folding chair in a midnight lobby, a notebook in a desk drawer, a piece of butcher paper on a community center wall, and a tree that was going to be planted in the spring in a courtyard in Jersey City, exactly where a 9-year-old had decided it should go. Some things you built because you had to. Some things you built because you could. And some things you built because someone had stayed long enough and looked closely enough and believed hard enough that they became possible. She had done that, and the tree was going in the ground. That was enough. There were things she had not expected about the months that followed the groundbreaking. She had expected the work to be hard, and it was. The community project had a complexity that made the Hargrove negotiation look simple by comparison. It required her to operate simultaneously in two worlds that did not share a language. The world of Voss Capital, with its financial models and acquisition timelines and the operating logic of a company that measured everything in margin and return. And the world of the block associations and neighborhood organizations and the residents who showed up to community meetings on Tuesday evenings after long days at jobs that paid them a fraction of what anyone on the 42nd floor earned, who had learned through repeated experience that the difference between a developer's promise and a developer's delivery was a gap wide enough to drive a city block through. She had expected to find that gap difficult to navigate. What she had not expected was how much she came to rely on the skills she had built in 2 years of working for Declan Voss. The ability to identify what a room actually needed versus what it said it needed. The habit of cross-referencing everything, of asking where the number came from and who had signed for it and what happened to it in the third quarter. The practice of documentation as its own form of advocacy. She had spent 2 years building those skills in the service of a man who mostly did not acknowledge them. Now she was using them in the service of a block association board in Jersey City that met above a hardware store, and the work felt for the first time in a long time like the right size for her. Bernard Cole became improbably one of her most reliable collaborators. He had the institutional knowledge of someone who had watched the neighborhood change for 3 decades and had the deep institutional memory of a man who documented everything not in notebooks, but in his head, in the reliable storage of someone who had learned that official records were unreliable and that what you remembered yourself was the only thing you could count on. He knew which drainage issues had been reported to which department and what year and what the response had been. He knew where the previous green space promises had gone. He knew which block associations had been genuinely consulted on previous projects and which had been given the performance of consultation without any of the substance. He also knew Clara came to understand exactly how unusual it was for a developer to show up to a community center on a Saturday morning, alone without a team, without a presentation, and write things down in a notebook. He told her this on a Tuesday evening in January, standing in the parking lot after a block association meeting that had run 30 minutes over because people had things to say, and Clara had made clear that she had time to hear them. Your boss, Bernard said, he is not what I thought he was going to be. No, Clara said, he is not. Is he what you thought he was going to be? Bernard asked. She considered the question seriously the way she had learned to consider Bernard's questions, because he asked things that looked simple and landed somewhere more complicated. No, she said, he is not what I thought either. Bernard was quiet for a moment. He looked at the parking lot at the street light that had been out for 6 weeks and that the city had been promising to fix since October. People do not change, he said. Not usually. He looked at her, but sometimes they become more what they actually are. He paused. That is a different thing. She thought about that on the drive back to Manhattan. She was still thinking about it when she got home. The partnership agreement was signed in the second week of April after 2 rounds of revisions that Clara had requested and that Declan had agreed to without argument. Her name appeared on the Development Division's project documentation as co-principal, beginning with the Jersey City Community Project and extending to every subsequent project in the division's pipeline. The equity stake was equal structured as she had specified, and the language of the agreement reflected the conditions she had laid out on the rooftop in March with a precision that told her the lawyers had been given her exact words to work from. She signed it on a Thursday morning at her desk, not in a conference room, not with any ceremony. She signed it and put it in the folder with the rest of the project documentation and went back to the timeline she had been working on before Raymond Cross had brought it over for her signature. Stellan stopped by her desk an hour later. He looked at the folder. Done, she said. He nodded once. He looked like he wanted to say something. Then he looked like he had decided that what he wanted to say was already understood. He went back to his desk. Declan said nothing about it that day. He came out of his office at 2 in the afternoon for a meeting and walked past her desk and did not stop. But when she was closing down her monitors at 7:15 that evening, preparing to leave, she found a note on her keyboard. Same heavy paper as before, same handwriting. It read, "The folding chair is in storage unit 12 at a facility on West 38th Street. I looked up the address this morning in case you ever wanted to see it. There was no signature." She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the desk drawer with the other one on top of the closed notebook, and she sat there for a moment in the amber light of the almost empty floor and let herself feel the full and ordinary weight of something being real. Not dramatic, not rescued, not resolved into something clean and finished that could be labeled and put away. Just real the way the work was real, the way the tree going into the ground in Jersey City was real, the way the 2 entries in the notebook were real, and the 2 years were real, and the cost of all of it was real, and had been paid by both of them, not equally but genuinely in the currency of days and choices, and the slow discipline of becoming more what you actually were. She turned off her monitor. She picked up her bag. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button, and stood there looking at the closed doors and thought about a boy on a folding chair, in a lobby doing homework under fluorescent lights, while the building emptied out around him, learning the rhythms of spaces that did not belong to him, learning to be very quiet and very good at noticing things, learning that surviving in a place that did not see you meant becoming indispensable to it. She thought about how much of herself she recognized in that. The elevator doors opened. She got in. She pressed the lobby button and watched the doors close and thought the chair is on West 38th Street, in storage unit 12. She thought about that all the way down. Curtis Blaine nodded to her in the lobby. She nodded back. She walked out into the April night, and the air was warmer than it had been, and the city was doing its usual thing, relentless and lit, and entirely unconcerned with any particular person's reckoning. She walked to the subway. She went home. She made dinner and ate it at the table, which she did not always do, and she thought about Bernard saying people do not change. They become more what they actually are. And she thought about what she was actually becoming now, that the years of performance and endurance and invisible excellence had given way to something that had more room in it. She was still thinking about it when her phone buzzed. Declan. The text read, "The Block Association chair called me today. Not through the company, directly. She wanted to tell me the coffee at the last meeting was very good and that she hopes we will use the same shop for the opening event." Clara looked at that for a moment. Then she typed back, "She called me too. I told her we would." He responded immediately, "Good." She set the phone down and sat in her kitchen in the April quiet and smiled just to herself just for a moment before she got up to do the dishes. That was how things were now. Not perfect, not finished, but accumulating the way good things accumulated in small moments that did not ask to be witnessed, that added up over time into something that could hold the weight of what you put in it. She had learned to trust that. It had cost her everything it was supposed to cost. And on a Friday morning in May, when she walked into the lobby of Voss Capital Tower, and Curtis Blaine looked up from the front desk and said, "Good morning, Ms. Holt," with the same small, careful expression he had worn for 2 years, she realized that something had shifted in it. The sympathy was the same, but the quiet relief that he was not her, that had lived in the corners of his expression every morning for 2 years, was gone. She nodded to him. She crossed the pale marble floor. She took the elevator to the 42nd floor and sat down at her desk and opened her laptop and began, as she always began, by looking at what needed to be done and making sure she was already doing it. The difference was that now, when Declan came off the private elevator at 7:09 and walked past her desk, he stopped. He set down a coffee in a proper cup, not a paper sleeve, on the corner of her desk without a word. Then he kept walking toward his office. She looked at the coffee, then she looked at the door of his office, which was still moving, slowly closed behind him. She picked up the coffee. It was exactly the temperature she drank it. She had no idea how he had known that, and she thought about it for exactly 3 seconds before she decided that she would ask him later in the easy way she could ask him things now directly and without calculating the cost of the question. Later, she thought. For now, there was work to do. She turned to her screen and began.